All right, so good evening everyone and welcome to Take Charge for April of 2018. So we all know that there are many risk factors that contribute to the progression and development itself of coronary artery disease. And we always like to talk about these risk factors so that we know what they are and identify how to manage them and control them so that if we do have heart disease, it's not going to progress. As a matter of fact, we know that if you can control your risk factors, in some cases, you can get heart disease to regress. We've talked about that in the past. So today we're going to be talking about a risk factor that a lot of the times not managed very well, and that's blood pressure. Blood pressure is a risk factor for heart disease, for stroke, needs to be managed well. Blood pressure itself is very labile. It goes up and down an awful lot throughout the day, and that contributes to one of the reasons why it's not always managed so well. Next month, we're going to be listening to our medical director, Dr. O, and he's going to talk more about targets and treatment options for it. Today, though, we're going to be talking about what can you do yourselves without any medication or anything like that, in particular with your diets. What kind of food can you eat that will increase the odds that you've got a well-controlled and healthy blood pressure? So we're very lucky today to have one of our dietitians, Veronica Rouse. Veronica's been working with us for how many years now?
Just over a year.
Just over a year. And she does a lot of the education for our current cardiac population, the diabetes and all that kind of good stuff. So Veronica, let us know about eating and blood pressure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight. The plan today is to talk about nutrition and its role on blood pressure management. So I'm going to try my best to translate the evidence or the recommendations from the guidelines to describe why we're recommending these things for nutrition management, and then incorporate the guidelines into practical, everyday things that you can change on a regular basis. So to start, I just want everyone to quickly reflect on a simple question. What are you eating now? So you could take last week as an example, perhaps when you were grocery shopping, how much of your grocery cart was whole foods? Whole foods being fruits, vegetables, our meat, our dairy products, and how much was processed boxed foods? You know, our crackers, our granola bars, our frozen pizzas. Was it 50-50? Just think about that. And then the other question I'd like to ask is, how many times last week did you eat out? Eat out for dinner, eat out for lunch, and how many times did you make your meal at home? So it's just a simple question, but we'll come back to it at the end, and you'll see why that's relevant. So we're here to talk about blood pressure, and blood pressure is prevalent in Canada. 1 in 5 Canadian adults are living with high blood pressure, and about 20% of these individuals are unaware of it. It's one of those silent conditions where we don't know we have it until it's measured. Another statistic that's interesting is 9 in 10 individuals that are living in Canada are likely to develop high blood pressure in their lifetime. So if it's not ourselves that are living with high blood pressure, it's definitely somebody that we know or will know. So that's why this talk is relevant, to discuss ways to manage it through food. So let's look at the research behind those nutrition management. It started in the 90s with vegetarian diet trials. And what they were showing was that individuals who were living a vegetarian lifestyle, eating a lot of plant foods, had lower blood pressure than their counterparts, the individuals who weren't eating vegetarian. So it was a neat trend that a group of researchers then picked up and said, hey, let's explore this further. So in 1997, this group of researchers created something called the DASH trial. Now, who's heard of the DASH trial before? Good. Yeah, lots of people, and I hope everyone has. We do talk about this in our program, so I tried to not repeat anything, but take a different approach tonight. So in the 1997 was the classic landmark DASH trial. And then the same group of researchers had another trial after that. It was in 2001. And what they were testing to see if a sodium restriction on top of this DASH dietary pattern could improve blood pressure further. And then in 2005, the same group of researchers did another trial called the OmniHeart trial, and that was to see if there was different macronutrients that would improve blood pressure further. So we'll talk about each of these further. You're probably looking at the dates of these trials and thinking these are pretty old. They're about 20 years old. And they are older studies, but they're classics. They're very well done studies. These researchers had great research methods, and they showed great results, which have then been repeated. And that's why we know that this DASH diet is really effective. So let's look at that classic 1997 trial a little further. So I mentioned that the research methods were really well done, and that's because the studies were something called a feeding trial. Feeding trials mean that the researchers provided all of the research participants with their food. So that means that they didn't have to worry about applying the guidelines to their everyday. They didn't have to worry about grocery shopping or meal planning in any way. So that means, well, as a result, the adherence to the dietary pattern is really good. About 450 individuals were in this trial, and they were then split up into 3 different dietary patterns. We had the control group, which is a typical Canadian American diet where they had a lot of saturated fat from their animal meat. They had low fiber, not a lot of fruits and vegetables, and not a lot of plant proteins. Then they had another group, which was the fruit and vegetable group. Remember, we talked about the vegetarian diet, and that had some type of influence on improving blood pressure. And so they wanted to look at if they included 5 fruits and 3 vegetable servings, did that improve blood pressure compared to this control diet that the typical American Canadian is eating? And then the last group was something called the combination diet, which was later called the DASH dietary pattern. They included the same amount of fruits and vegetables as in the fruits and vegetables group. They also included the same amount of protein as the control group, but they chose leaner meats. So leaner meats like chicken or omega-3 rich fish. They also had dairy in this combination diet, so they had 2 to 3 servings of low-fat dairy products as well. So when we look at the graph here, this is the results. So I guess to orient you to the graph, we have the 2 separate lines. I guess I can do this. Can you see the mouse? So the top line here is your systolic blood pressure reading. So that's the top number when you get your blood pressure measured, the systolic number. And then the bottom line here is the diastolic blood pressure reading, which is the bottom number. And then you have the 3 lines because they had the 3 different groups that we just spoke of. So the control trial was up here, the fruits and vegetable group was here, and then the DASH diet was here. And so, as you can see, after 2 weeks of eating this type of diet, that DASH dietary group reduced their blood pressure significantly within 2 weeks. And then it lasted for most of the trial, which was 8 weeks long. So you saw a little bit of an improvement with the fruits and vegetables, but even more of an improvement with that DASH dietary pattern. And when we look at the actual numbers, that systolic number, or the top number of your blood pressure, reduced by about 11 or 12 points, and the diastolic number, the bottom number, reduced by about 7 or 8 points, which is pretty significant and is almost as good as some medications that are out there. So let's look at that DASH diet. The researchers summarized this DASH dietary pattern into this nice little pyramid. Pyramids are a fun way to categorize the groups because we have most of the bottom part of the pyramid makes up the majority of the diet, and as we go up to the top of the pyramid, we want less and less. So at the beginning, we mentioned that vegetarian diet was very beneficial. So you can see that most of the bottom of the pyramid is plant-based foods. We have our fruits and vegetables. So they're suggesting about 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And quality is important here. So they were encouraging more whole foods than processed foods, so things like our fruit juices. Then we have 7 to 8 servings of whole grains. So grains could be, your whole grain bread compared to your white bread. So they're encouraging whole grains. It could also be your bran cereal, which is pictured there. It could be your quinoa, your bulgur, your barley. There's lots of whole grain options out there, but you can include whole grains at each meal. As I mentioned, they had the low-fat dairy. So about 2 to 3 servings of low-fat dairy every day. You had your lean meat, your chicken, your fish, as well as seafood here. You had some plant-based proteins. So plant-based proteins are your beans, your legumes, your nuts and seeds, and they included at least 1 serving of plant-based protein a day. Of course, every diet has some fat, so we had some olive oil, mayonnaise, as well as avocado, those types of unsaturated fats. And at the very top, they included sweets. So the researchers weren't dummies. They knew that if they didn't include sweets, a diet is very hard to adhere to. So they included sweets to make it very realistic. And they're suggesting about 5 sweets per week. Again, quality is important here. They're suggesting sweets would be things like jam, honey, a fruit bottom yogurt, that type of thing. Oops, sorry. So when we look at this pyramid too, what's missing in this pyramid? Booze? We'll talk about alcohol later.
Chocolate?
Chocolate. Yeah, and chocolate could be incorporated in the sweets up there. So it could be included in moderation.
Red meat? Beef?
Yeah, exactly. Red meat. So a lot of the protein here was the leaner meats, which was the fish and the chicken, the turkey. Exactly. And yeah. Leafy vegetables? Yeah, so actually they are included. They may not be featured, but they would be included in the bottom part with the fruits and vegetables.
Did they do any tracking of cholesterol and glucose at the same time?
So this, when they're looking at this, they were just looking at the blood pressure. It's later been studied for things like reducing your blood sugar and your cholesterol levels, and it has shown an improvement in both of those things as well. So things like the Diabetes Canada actually encourages this as one of the ways you could eat healthy to manage your blood sugar.
Well, at the bottom it talks about salt, lower salt foods from all categories. Is that what's missing?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the processed foods aren't there, right? Your pizza, your pop, where does that fit in? We know that we do eat those, and they're not included here, and that's right, because those are the higher sodium options. So thank you.
How bad is the chicken with skin?
How bad is the chicken with the skin? It's has a little bit more saturated fat than the chicken without the skin, but it's still it could be a leaner meat than some of the red meat that has a lot of the marbling or higher saturated fat. So it's kind of in between. Caffeine, yes, and we'll talk about caffeine too.
Well, liquids in general are.
You're right, liquids in general. So we'll talk about alcohol and caffeine, and then the rest of the Exactly. The rest of the liquids that were encouraged were water. Great. So now that we understand that DASH dietary pattern, what the same group of researchers were then funded for another study. So they did this study in 1997 and then funded for the next study in 2001. And this study was to take that DASH dietary pattern and see if a sodium restriction could help further improve blood pressure. We know that restricting sodium does improve it, so will that play a role? And just to note, in the 1997 study, they didn't restrict sodium. So the average sodium amount in all of the diets that were trialed was about 3,000 milligrams of sodium. So it was not a low sodium diet. So in 2001, they decided to test that control diet again, so that typical American Canadian diet, and then compare it to the DASH dietary pattern. So they split about 400 individuals into those two groups, and then within the two groups, they layered them with 3 other diets. So one that's a high sodium diet, one that's an intermediate diet, and one that's a low sodium diet. So just to put into context what these numbers look like, how much do you think the typical Canadian is eating in a day of sodium?
Intermediate level.
Intermediate? And it's actually the high sodium, so about 3,400 milligrams per day. So let's see what happened. So again, I'll just talk about the graphs just to give you a background. So we have this graph on the side here is that systolic number, that's the top number of your blood pressure. And the next graph here is the diastolic blood pressure number, so the bottom number. Then we have this top line is that control group, and the bottom line is the DASH dietary group. Then we have sodium on the bottom, so the high sodium to low sodium groups. So what does this mean? Well, the first thing that this suggests is that it confirms the results of the 1997 study, that comparing that control diet to the DASH diet, no matter what the sodium level, that it still is going to improve your blood pressure. So that's good news. It's always good to repeat studies and get similar results. But yeah.
I don't want to put on the spot with this question because
Sure.
it's a question that if these lectures were in the proper order from the previous one, which is in the context of blood pressure,
Right.
what is a good range on high and low? It may depend on the person, but
Yeah, what are the targets?
from a health point of view, a target.
Yeah. No, it's a good, definitely a good question.
That's just to the diet.
Yeah, no, definitely. Put it into context. You're right. I guess the question is, what are the blood pressure targets that we're looking for? I didn't talk too much about it because I know Dr. O will be coming next week.
Right.
But just in short, I guess the normal blood pressure that is considered normal is 120 over 80. But the targets are anyone living with a, cardiac, some kind of a cardiac event, or you've had a heart disease, I guess, you'd want a target of 140 over 90 or less. And then if you're living with diabetes, the target is 130 over 80 or less. But I'm sure Dr. O will explain those targets in a little bit more
I'm sorry,
detail.
But I want
No.
to put your presentation.
Yeah.
in context,
Yeah, and no, it's a good point. And so that's, now you can compare what your blood pressure is and how much these diets can actually lower it. Yeah, no, very good. Thank you for bringing it up. So it confirms the results of the first study, and then also what it's showing is that, so we have that control diet at the top here. So this line here is that control diet, and so as sodium is reduced, you can see that blood pressure also reduces in a stepwise fashion. So both for the systolic number and for the diastolic number. And so when we look at the numbers, the systolic number could reduce by about 6 to 7 points, and that diastolic number could reduce by 3 to 4 points. So that's with the control diet. Now let's look at the DASH diet. So when we look at the DASH line here, we can see that, again, as sodium is reduced or restricted, the blood pressure is improving. And so with DASH, that systolic blood pressure number reduces by about 3 points, and then diastolic reduces by about 1 to 2 points. So not as, it still lowers it, but not as much as we had initially saw in just eating that DASH style-like diet. Okay, so now we're going to jump to the last trial, which is called the OMNI-Heart trial. And OMNI stands for Optimal Macronutrient Intake Trial to Prevent Heart Disease. So the group of researchers was the same, right? They saw that the DASH style worked in the first trial. The second trial saw that restricting sodium improved blood pressure even more. So now let's look at our macronutrients to see if there was an appropriate or ideal macronutrient distribution. What are macronutrients? So macronutrients, we have 3 of them, and they're listed here. So we have carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Those are macronutrients. So what they did was they took the first diet, was actually the control diet, and it was the DASH diet that we've been talking about. So that typical DASH diet that we just explained was the control diet. And what they did was they took 10% of the calories from carbohydrates, and they switched it to unsaturated fats. And so, what are unsaturated fats?
Avocado?
Yeah, avocado, our olive oil, some of our nuts and seeds. Those are unsaturated fats. And then the other group that they tested it against was the protein diet. So they took 10% of the calories from that original DASH diet, and they switched it to 10% protein calories. And on top of that, so it wasn't just protein, but they made sure that half of the protein that was included in this group was from plants. And what are plant proteins?
Pulses.
Nuts, beans.
Exactly, nuts, beans, pulses. So let's look at the results. So when they switched the calories to the unsaturated fat diet, they showed that the systolic number, that top number of the blood pressure, reduced by about 2 to 3 points, and the diastolic number, the bottom number, reduced by about 1 to 2 points. So it could improve it further. And then in the protein diet, that showed that the systolic number improved by about 3 to 4 points, and the diastolic number improved by 2 to 3 points. So this was on top of what the DASH diet can do for you if you switch the macronutrients a little bit. Yes?
So how often did they measure the individual's blood pressure to get the averages that they're reporting?
Yeah, so they tested them every day, but these results are from the beginning of the trial to the end of the trial to see what the difference was. And so the trial length was 12 weeks. So what is this telling us? That, the DASH dietary pattern works. We know it works. And now we can kind of tweak it to our own preferences. So if we wanted to include more fats, that can help. If we wanted to include more proteins, maybe that can help even further. So think about your preferences and what that looks like for you. Yeah.
In the DASH diet, what is the ratio, I guess you would say, of the 3 macronutrients one to another?
Yeah, so in the original DASH, the carbohydrates were about 55% of our energy. And then I think, so it's 55 and 15% protein. So the remainder is 30. Thanks.
Thank you.
No problem.
30% fat.
Yes, as calories. Actually, this trial did test the cholesterol too, to that other question, and it did show that both the protein and the unsaturated fats diet could reduce your cholesterol, so your LDL cholesterol and your triglycerides further. Yes.
I have a question for you, Monica.
Sure.
So these were feeding trials.
Yes.
Were the calories that the participants consumed predetermined?
Yes.
And was there any weight loss or gain in any of these groups?
So the calories were about 2,000 calories was the average that they gave all of these participants, and they kept it the same so that they actually wouldn't have any weight loss, so that they can control that as a confounding factor. So we know that the improvement of the blood pressure was just strictly from the food and not necessarily from anything else.
Thank you.
No problem.
How did you monitor their exercise level?
How do they monitor their exercise level? Good question. I don't know that. That is a very good question. I can look it up and I can get back to maybe Rob and you maybe. Yeah.
Next month I can
Yeah. Sorry. That's a very good question. Was there another question?
No, it's exactly the same question. We all
Good.
know that exercise
Is helpful for sure. I'm sure it was controlled. It was, but I'll have to look into it. I don't want to speak to it. Awesome. Good. So that's why I guess the DASH dietary pattern is recommended in these guidelines here. So not only the hypertension guidelines, but as I said, it's also in Diabetes Canada's guidelines to help reduce our blood sugar, and also in the American Heart Association guidelines to help reduce our blood cholesterol levels. So it does help with a lot of the risk factors. So what makes the DASH diet so great? Well, I guess in the beginning when the DASH diet researchers were trying to think about this type of dietary pattern, this was what they wanted to include. They wanted a diet that was rich in potassium, rich in magnesium, rich in calcium, rich in plant-based proteins, and dietary fiber. And that's because they knew that in the 90s, remember, those vegetarian diets were effective, and they thought it was based on these minerals that help with relaxing our blood vessels. And then this diet was also low in saturated fat, cholesterol, total fat, and added sugars. And when DASH diet researchers were questioned about this diet, saying, well, what makes this diet so effective? The response was that it wasn't designed to say. So they don't know if it was the potassium or if it was the magnesium or if it was the calcium. They know that it was all of those food groups that I mentioned at the beginning that worked together that provided this benefit, right? They didn't isolate any of these nutrients to see if that was of benefit. So what's the next logical question then? If we know that this is what's the diet's rich in, what would you be asking next?
I take vitamins with that stuff.
Yes. What about supplements? What about vitamins? Do they work? Thank you. So for researchers have tested this, and they thought if we can isolate these vitamins and minerals and take them in maybe mega doses, do they help to improve our blood pressure further? And the short answer is no, they don't. So when they were tested or trialed, some did show a little bit of benefit, but they were small benefits, and they weren't. There was inconsistent results. So when they redid trials, they weren't showing the same results. So in summary, basically the guidelines aren't recommending supplements. They're suggesting that we still get these minerals, so the calcium, the potassium, the magnesium, but from our by dietary means, so through our food groups. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. David Katz. He's a director at the Yale Prevention Center. And he was responding to one of these trials where they were testing a vitamin or mineral, and there wasn't a significant result in the end. And his response was, these we keep testing them, we keep hypothesizing that it's going to work, but it's proven wrong and wrong again that supplements aren't working. So maybe the active ingredient in broccoli is actually broccoli, right? It's not the isolated nutrient that we think, broccoli is rich in vitamin C, so it's not the vitamin C, but maybe it's all the other minerals and vitamins that maybe we're not even aware of, and how they work together in every bite of broccoli. And I guess that's another thing that we've kind of gotten away from in when we think about food, right? When we're eating food, we kind of think more that we're eating nutrients, that we're eating vitamin C, or we want to eat potassium, or we want to eat this food for this benefit, and we've gotten away from thinking about food as food. So I would encourage that shift back to thinking about food as food because of all the benefits that it does offer. So again, looking at the DASH dietary pattern, that's what this is promoting: whole foods and how they all interact with each other. So let's look at what a typical day looks like for that DASH dietary pattern. We had, so just take a look. I mean, when you look at that pattern, it's 3 meals. You can easily take some of those meals and break them into snacks if that works for your routine. What else stands out to you when you're looking at that day? A lot of vegetables, yeah, definitely. Vegetables at each meal, lots of color there. Even for lunch, you have 6 servings of vegetables in that salad. Remember, 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day is what they were recommending.
It all looks good to me.
It all looks good to you. Awesome. I like that.
And lots of food in general.
And lots of food, exactly. This is going to fill us up. It's not a restrictive diet, and it shows great benefit. Yes?
There's no cheese on this.
There is no cheese. So they were suggesting low-fat dairy products. So low-fat dairy products are your skim 1% milk, your 0 to 2% yogurts. Cheese is a higher fat item, and you can choose the lower fat cheeses, but they didn't have a lot of cheese in this diet. Yeah.
What about potatoes and rice?
Yeah, what about potatoes and rice? Definitely can be included. It's just not featured on here. When we're thinking about rice, we'd want to make sure that it's brown rice, whole grains, was prominent in their principles and the pattern. And potatoes could definitely be included here as well. Mm-hmm. No problem there. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, what about people who are lactose intolerant? What did they substitute? So one of those guiding principles was that the diet was rich in calcium as well as magnesium, which a lot of the dairy products did offer. So you can definitely substitute it for things like those plant-based milks now. And then there's also things like, our tofu and things like broccoli or leafy greens are higher in calcium as well. So just making sure that you are covering or getting adequate calcium and magnesium if you are lactose intolerant, but definitely can still be applied. Yes?
The low-fat diet thing has been around for quite a few years.
Yes.
And in recent times, there's a lot more that you see now saying that it's been debunked, that that's not the case.
Yeah.
There's so much conflicting evidence when you go online and try and figure out what is the right kind of diet. And the sources seem credible, and Dr. So-and-so or whatever. It's very, very hard to go through all of that and figure out what is right.
Right.
So can you comment on that?
Fair enough. Yes, nutrition is complicated. It's always changing. That keeps me on my toes. So you're right. I guess in the past we did think a lower fat diet was better for our heart health, and now we're moving towards a higher fat diet. And I'm going to actually speak to that in a second. And if I don't answer your question, just raise your hand and I'll Yes.
Just back to one of the questions the lady just asked about lactose. The only real area of concern is with dairy and all dairy. Period.
Just dairy.
So there's lots of lactose-free dairy products available. So
Yeah, exactly. Which is nice that they are becoming more readily available, those lactose-free items. So exactly, as long as we're getting that calcium and magnesium in the recommended amounts, then it will still help our blood pressure out. Yes.
You know, on that pyramid, the smallest amount that we're allowed to eat was the sugar.
Yes.
What does sugar have to do with blood pressure? Like, and what does sodium? We know it's bad, but what does it have to do with blood pressure?
Yeah. So sugar, what does sugar and sodium have to do with blood pressure? So sugar, I'm going to wait to address sodium because sodium I will talk to, but sugar, I guess, why is that important with blood pressure management? And when we think of sugar, the sweets in that dietary pattern, it was at the top because we don't want a lot of it because it doesn't offer a lot of those minerals. What sugar offers us is energy. It doesn't offer us a lot of fiber, calcium, potassium, magnesium. So it's sweet and it's nice to eat, but it's not really nourishing our body. So that's why it doesn't help us with our blood pressure.
Is it hurting our body?
Is it hurting our body? Too much can definitely hurt. They're suggesting keeping our sugar amount to about 10% of our calories because we know that too much sugar can increase our blood sugar levels, but also our triglyceride levels, which could affect heart disease as well. Yeah.
5 fruits and 2 sweets, isn't that a lot of sugar?
Yeah, 5 servings of fruits and sweets, is that a lot of sugar? And so, yes, if you are living with diabetes, we do recommend limiting your fruit to about 3 servings of fruit a day, but you could then increase your vegetables in this diet to reach the 8 to 10 servings a day. So it doesn't have to be 5 fruits. It was just that's what they trialed, but fruits and vegetables have the same minerals in them. So that's what I would switch for that. And when we think about if you're not living with diabetes, having natural sugar in the form of fruit is actually okay for us and pretty healthy, especially when it's attached to a whole food. It has fiber with it, so it doesn't increase our blood sugar as much. And yeah.
And also, when you say serving of fruit, don't you mean something like, like there's an apple that might be really 2 servings?
Oh, definitely. As we go to the grocery store now, the apples are big and they could be considered 2 servings. Food's getting bigger and bigger. So a serving would be something that you could compare to maybe a baseball or a tennis ball. If it's bigger than that, then I would count it as 2 servings. Yes.
What about eggs?
What about eggs? Yes. So eggs weren't included in this pattern. When this dietary pattern existed or started, we thought that limiting our cholesterol was really important for our heart health because eating dietary cholesterol, which is found in eggs, could increase our dietary cholesterol. But the newer research was saying that perhaps that's not necessarily the case and we could be a little bit more liberal with the dietary cholesterol intake. We don't have to restrict it that much. But for this diet, they did restrict cholesterol. The diet was low in cholesterol. Yes.
How much is a serving of vegetables, and can you have those vegetables in a soup?
Yeah, so how much is a serving of vegetables? It's about half a cup is a serving of vegetables, and can you have it in soup? Definitely. Any way you want it, you can incorporate it.
The nutrients are still there.
The nutrients are still there, especially when you have something like soup. You're boiling it and then you're actually drinking the liquid after. So if anything, some of the nutrients in vegetables would be lost in the broth that you then eat. So I'm not too concerned. Yes.
The books against sugar, excessive sugar, are going to the solution for people with overweight in the States, which is to go to a type of Atkins-free diet. Would that be dangerous for cardiac?
So an Atkins-like diet, and would that be dangerous
Weight loss, yeah.
For a cardiac individual? And I guess I'll speak to a higher fat diet next, but an Atkins-like diet, it depends. Like, it can be incorporated, but with the Atkins dietary pattern, it was high in meats and saturated fat, and we know that too much saturated fat can be harmful for our heart, so probably wouldn't be recommended. We could look to something like that Mediterranean diet pattern, which is also a high-fat diet, but we're not using saturated fats. Instead, we're using that unsaturated fat. Yes.
Is there any ideas on cooking versus uncooked vegetables particularly?
Yeah, what about cooked vegetables versus uncooked? What's better? Again, it depends. So sometimes when we heat vegetables, some of those water, or when we boil vegetables like in the soup, some of the water-soluble vitamins could be lost in cooking. But also, if we just eat raw foods, some vitamins and minerals are actually activated with heat. So what I would recommend is a variety of both. And then that way you're kind of covering your bases.
Or semi-cooked?
Or semi-cooked, sure. That's a good way to do it. Okay, I'll move on. Oh, yeah.
What's happened to the pasta?
What happened to the pasta? So pasta can still be included. You just want to be choosing the whole grain options, right? So the brown pasta, you could even include spelt pasta. There's lots of different ones out there now that would definitely fit into this plan. Remember, grains weren't restricted. They had 7 to 8 servings of grains a day, so that's you can include them at each meal, and that would be okay. So dietary patterns. The DASH dietary pattern is high in vegetables and fruits, whole grains, low-fat milk, small portions of lean meats, fish, vegetarian meals, nuts, and oils, right? So we're moving away from looking at the dietary pattern from nutrient standpoint, and now we're looking at it through foods, foods that we actually eat. This is more applicable to what we do. So is DASH the only answer? Is that the only way that we can be eating to help improve our blood pressure? And this dietary pattern, does anyone know what this one is? It's the Mediterranean dietary pattern. And it follows the exact same principles as what I just described. You can see it's also in the shape of a pyramid. And this big part at the bottom is mainly plant foods, right? We have our whole grains, we have our fruits and vegetables, we have our nuts and seeds, our legumes, so lots of plant foods there. And then as we go up, it's more lean meats. They probably have a little bit more seafood and fish here. They definitely have higher fat than the DASH diet. You see the olive oil is down here at the bottom of the pyramid. But as we move up, leaner meats, and then less red meat and sweets are at the top. So very similar. It's just, remember, switching some of those macronutrients around, removing some carbohydrate, adding some fat. So that's what I would say to the higher fat diet, is that this is what we are recommending a lot in our program, because the fat in this diet, the unsaturated fat, especially the olive oil, has been shown to be heart protective. And it does follow the same principles as the DASH dietary pattern. Yes?
Isn't cholesterol a problem? And I'm looking at shrimp. Does that have a lot of cholesterol?
Yeah, so shrimp, doesn't it have a lot of cholesterol? And it does, but remember I was talking about dietary cholesterol and how it doesn't increase our blood cholesterols as much as we once thought. So we don't need to restrict it to 0. We don't want to overdo it though. So that being considered with your eggs or your shrimp, those would be higher cholesterol items that we can just use in moderation. Yes.
There's 2 things that I noticed on there that caught my eye. Mm-hmm. One is my cheese is back.
Yes.
But secondly, I've never seen that written before, but I agree with it, is at the very bottom. which has to do with lifestyle, is enjoy meals with others.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
Yeah.
This is a nice dietary pattern because it does include that bottom part. It includes physical activity there, which we all know is very beneficial, as well as eating with others, socializing, and bringing back the enjoyment of food. Yes, very important. I'll speak to that later.
You've used the term dietary cholesterol.
Yes.
And obviously, the other type of cholesterol is the big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in this that helps us manage that side?
Yeah, so lowering our LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterols are lousy cholesterol. We don't want a lot of it, and diet can play a role in reducing that. Specifically, those plant proteins are really beneficial in reducing our cholesterol levels. So that's our beans and our legumes, our pulses, our nuts and seeds, as well as our olive oil has been shown to do that, and fiber. So eating enough plant foods will get us lots of fiber, which will help with our cholesterol levels. So alcohol, I know this was a question. So what else do the guidelines suggest? So alcohol, they mentioned that moderate drinking can increase our blood pressure. If you aren't drinking now, they don't recommend you start. And if you are drinking, they suggest that you limit them to the safe drinking guidelines. So they're suggesting no more than 14 drinks a week for men, no more than 9 drinks a week for women. And most importantly, you can't save up your drinks for the weekend. They're limiting you to 2 drinks per day. And what's a
Increase my drinking to that level.
what's a standard drink? Does anyone know what a standard drink is?
4 ounces?
Yeah, so for wine it's 5 ounces, for beer 12 ounces, and for hard liquor 1.5 ounces. Yes.
So they're taking 1 drink away from us.
1 drink away.
Yeah, Heart and Stroke says 15 per week.
Yeah, so these are from the hypertension guidelines is what I'm quoting. But there are lots of different safe drinking guidelines out there now, but this is what I'm reporting from the hypertension guidelines.
What about red versus white?
What about red versus white? So a lot of the studies with alcohol have been with red. So if you like red, go for it, but I don't think that I don't know of a study that has tested all the alcohols to see which one is better. Yes.
Is the difference between the number of drinks for men and women based on the assumption that men are generally bigger than women?
Yes, that men are
So it's not really a gender-based thing, it's a size-based thing?
a size-based thing, yes. Exactly. And caffeine was mentioned. The guidelines are saying that the research behind the caffeine is that if we drink 1 to 2 cups of filtered coffee a day, our blood pressure could increase, but it only increases for a short term, so 1 to 3 hours after we consume it. Longer term research is showing that if we drink caffeine, overall it's not increasing our blood pressure. So it's just, again, how big your cup is, right? We know that this 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine is about 1 to 2 cups of filtered coffee, and a cup is actually a cup. It's not what Starbucks is giving us in a venti. So sodium. So we know that there's a strong relationship with too much sodium and an increase of blood pressure. That's been clear for a really long time. We saw that in the DASH trial when they restricted the sodium, blood pressure reduced. And so hypertension guidelines are suggesting no more than 2,000 milligrams of sodium a day. We know that Canadians are having 3,400 around milligrams per day. Where do you think most of the sodium's coming from?
Processed foods.
Processed foods, exactly. And restaurant meals, so things that are added outside of the home. So this is just the research behind that guideline, that they do have a lot of meta-analysis. Meta-analysis are when they combine all of the studies together, and in summary, they're showing that if we reduce our sodium to 2,000 milligrams, it can reduce our systolic number and diastolic number if we're living with hypertension or if we're not. Yes.
Are restaurants moving towards using less sodium?
Are restaurants moving towards using less sodium? Not that I'm aware of, no. It would be nice. Definitely something you can ask them to do when you go to a restaurant. Just say, I'm following a low sodium diet. Is it possible to reduce it? But not that I'm aware of. So most of our 71%, that big red chunk of the pie, is the sodium that's added outside of the home. About 14% is inherent to food, which means that it's naturally present in a lot of the foods that we eat. 5% is added at the table, 5% is added in home cooking, and less than 1% is in our water and other dietary supplements. So, taking away that salt shaker can only help manage about 10% of that intake. A lot of it has to do with those processed foods and restaurant meals. So there's this really great report that was released by a Heart and Stroke Foundation just recently, last December. So you can Google it. It's great. What it's showing, or it's grouping or describing, is the difference in processed foods. So what they have grouped as, or have identified, is that Canadians are eating too much ultra-processed foods. What do you think ultra-processed foods are? Snacks, McDonald's. More foods that you would buy at the grocery store would be the ultra-processed foods. Chips. Yep. Cookies. Exactly. So this grouping of food here is called ultra-processed foods. And what do they have in common? A lot of salt, a lot of sodium. Exactly. A lot of sugar as well, and not a lot of minerals. So the definition of ultra-processed is that they're branded, they're packaged attractively, they're marketed, they make a profit, they're the easy and fast choice, and there's not a lot of real food in there. So in this report, they're showing that in 2004, which is this graph here, compared to 2015, the amount of ultra-processed food, so that red part of the graph, is the same. We were eating the same amount of ultra-processed food in 2004 to 2015. And then the green part here is unprocessed or minimally processed food. So those are things like our fruits and vegetables, but perhaps they're processed into canned or frozen options. And then the yellow group is the processed culinary ingredients, so things like our oils. And then 6% is just processed foods. So, yeah.
About that?
Sure.
So those numbers aren't drastically changed between 2004 and 2015.
Yeah.
So is the rise of obesity thought to be just due to serving sizes, supersized everything?
Yeah, so the rise of obesity perhaps isn't related to the ultra-processed food, but is it related to the supersizing, the bigger servings? And definitely, I think that can be suggested as a hypothesis, as well as, sedentary activity as well has increased, and sweetened beverages they're linking to as well, which has increased. So there's a lot of different reasons for it, but yeah, you're right. The ultra-processed foods haven't increased per se. Yes.
The factor in ultra-processing is the speed.
Yeah. So
being able to get it ready and eat it.
Yes.
So it's all because of our time-challenged society.
Yes, exactly. So it has to do with a lot has to do with the time-challenged society that we live in. That time's important, and we don't have time to cook, and so that's what marketers or manufacturers have done, is made food quick and easy, but unfortunately less healthy for us. Yes. So when we compare the nutrients of the two groups, when we compare them, so the first column is that, let me get my mouse. The ultra-processed foods is this column, and then all the other foods is this column. So when we look at the nutrient breakdown, you can see that the calories are double for ultra-processed foods. The free sugar, or sugars, are tripled in ultra-processed foods, and sodium is doubled. Okay? And then when we look at those minerals that we were talking about that have been rich in the DASH dietary pattern, the potassium is halved in ultra-processed foods, calcium is also halved, and magnesium is almost halved as well. So we're getting 2 to 3 times the things that we don't want in ultra-processed foods, and half the things that we do want, and we know that show a benefit. So the report recommends a whole bunch of things, but the one thing that I like to point out is that if we choose a variety of whole and minimally processed foods, we will be nourishing our body a lot better. So how do we, one more thing before that, food guides. So there's been a lot of reports that have come out, specifically, I guess, countries have changed their food guides to try to talk about unprocessed and processed foods. So this is one from Denmark. What they've done is they've made a pyramid as well, and they did it more like a traffic light. So greens are unprocessed foods, your fruits, your vegetables, your milk products, your lean meats. The yellow part, the caution, is your saturated fats, your red meat, your butter, and then the red is try to limit, which is that ultra-processed foods. So that's Denmark. Brazil has also done something similar where they've categorized different foods based on the processing. And then who's heard that Canada's getting a new food guide? Yeah, so hopefully this year sometime, but they've released 3 guiding principles to the new food guide, and the second principle is that processed or prepared foods and beverages that are high in sodium, sugars, or saturated fat and undermine healthy eating. So hopefully the report or the guide that they do present us will help to have some guidelines to help us eat less of this. Yes.
Given the publicity that's gone around this particular activity that's going on,
Yes.
I found myself really alarmed by the fact that I've heard the food industry, the processing food industry, is lobbying the government pretty heavily on this.
Yes, so you're right. They are lobbying. So the manufacturers, marketers of ultra-processed foods are lobbying to the government about this. The one thing that's nice about this food guide that's different than all other food guides is that the board that makes up the guidelines, a lot of the time industry sat on the board. So Dairy Farmers of Canada sat on the board, and this time they were not allowed to sit. It was just researchers to look at the evidence and base their recommendations. So yes, there's always going to be lobbying, but it was good that they are just looking at researchers to give us the evidence, the recommendations based on the evidence. So we need to eat more whole foods. Let's see how Canada's doing. So this was taken in 2016 from Statistics Canada, saying that adult women are getting about 2 to 3 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and adult men are getting 1 to 2 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. When we look at that DASH diet, we want about 8 to 10 servings a day. So we have a big improvement. I know this may not be you yet. I know cardiac patients are very highly motivated and have a healthy diet, but we still have the chance to improve. Right. So what can we do? How do we make this happen? It will take more time. So I know this was mentioned before. Healthy eating more whole foods does take a lot of time. We're busy people. We do a lot of things during the day. When we get home, we don't have time to find a recipe, then make sure we have the ingredients, perhaps go to the grocery store, get the ingredients, come back, wash and prep all the ingredients to make a meal, then sit down and enjoy that meal. That takes a lot of time. So, and I'm not denying that. It will take time, but it's more that we have to prioritize this as an activity that we do devote our time to. What helps with that? Meal planning helps. So instead of thinking about it every day, taking a day of the week and doing a meal plan, making a grocery list, and writing things out to be organized and prepared. What else can we do? We can shop in places that offer these whole foods more often. So I have a picture of farmers markets up there. When you go to these places, you want to buy the food. It looks great, and you can usually taste the food, as well as talk to the farmers, and you'll definitely be purchasing more foods when you do attend these things, and make it more of a social outing. Lots of farmers markets throughout Toronto, and you could go there as your Sunday activity, perhaps. And then I have St. Lawrence Market up here too, so it's not just whole foods like fruits and vegetables, but you can also get nice tasting fresh meats and low-fat dairy products as well. What else? So grocery stores know that we don't have a lot of time. So they've come up with a couple of strategies to help with that. Grocery Gateway is from Longo's, and what they do is you can order your food online and they'll deliver it to your door. So that takes the time away from actually going to the grocery store and picking out your food. Loblaws is doing something similar with, it's called Click and Collect, which has been recent, the last couple of years, the last year. But they're not delivering it to your doorstep. You'll put in your order online, and then they'll collect it for you, and you just pick it up when you go to the Loblaws location that's convenient for you. There's something called fruit and vegetable boxes. Has anyone heard of these? Yeah, so a lot of them are linked with local farms or organizations. There's lots of different ones. This is Fresh City Farms, but Mama Organics is a good one too. Like I said, lots of different ones. There's one that's cheaper that just came out. It's called the Ugly Food Box. So a lot of the fruits and vegetables that are uglier and can't be sold to grocery stores, they're putting them in a box, and it's a reduced rate. So if you Google fruit and vegetable boxes, there'll be lots to choose from. What they do, they every week will deliver a box of fruits and vegetables to your door. I love this because a lot of the times I'm going to the grocery store and getting the same fruits and vegetables every week. This way I'm getting a whole different variety of things and things that I would never have picked up on my own, and then I get to cook with them, create new things. So I do recommend it, and you have it so then you eat it, right? When it's at your home, you don't want it to spoil, so you end up eating more whole foods. What else is there? There's something called, they're called recipe kits now. So this is Chef's Plate. There's one called HelloFresh, but like I said, multiple different ones. And what they do is you can go on to their website and you can pick different meals. So each week they offer about 5 to 10 different recipes that you can choose from. So ones that you like, you just click them and they deliver all the ingredients to your doorstep in a nice box like that. Each meal will be in a little, bag, so that all you have to do is open the bag and chop up the ingredients that are in the bag based on a recipe card that's also in the bag. Yeah.
Customizable are these, because like lots of us who are suffering from heart disease are further along in life, and there may only be 2 people living in the world. And like, so are they family size?
Yeah, so how customizable are they? They do offer either a 2-person or a family box. So you can customize it that way, and then based on the ingredients or flavors that you like, you get to choose the meals. And if you want, you can always try them. The first time is usually very discounted to get you on board. So the first time is definitely comparable to what you would pay for things at the grocery store, to just try something like this out, perhaps learn a few new recipes along the way. And if you don't want to do any cooking, there's also ways that they'll have meals, healthy whole food meals that can be already made, delivered to your home. All you have to do is heat them up. Of course, the price of that increases, but there are options out there. What else can we do? Make fresh foods accessible. So have fruit on your counter when you go grocery shopping, and you have all these whole foods. Bring them home, wash them, package them in containers that are clear so that you can see them when you're opening up the fridge door, and that increases your chance that you'll actually eat them. And also part of that DASH dietary pattern, they're choosing snacks, whole foods as snacks, right? Your yogurt, your nuts and seeds. It's not those processed granola bars that we think are healthy or market to us as healthy. It's these whole foods that can give us a lot more of those minerals. A lot of people tell me that cooking's boring and they don't want to do it, and so I always suggest you can bring your device, computer to the kitchen, listen to a podcast, watch a movie just like you would on the couch, and then this way you're actually chopping and doing some meal prep that way. Lots of different activities out there around cooking now. So you can go to cooking classes, learn new skills. This can be a social outing for you and your friends. Could be a date night perhaps, but different ways to explore, different ways of eating, different recipes to trial. This is a picture because I think cooking is being lost, right? We're not cooking and we're not passing down the traditions of cooking as much. So I encourage you to involve the family and teach them about cooking and your traditions. I know when I think about my life, and my grandma taught me so much, and some of my fondest memories of are us in the kitchen together. And now when I create those meals, I always think of her. So it's a great way to pass down traditions and skills that are being lost. And then our website, cardiaccollege.ca, we have 6 great recipes on there right now that are whole foods, really easy to make, and it's a YouTube video, so it's easy to follow as well. And then, as was mentioned earlier, we have, right now we're mindlessly eating. And I encourage you to bring the food back to your table, share meals with each other, and that helps to create it helps you to encourage you to eat more whole foods this way as well, because you can include people in the making of these meals, as well as the sharing of it. So what's the takeaway? The DASH diet pattern is supported by extensive research. Minerals as supplements are not as effective as whole foods, and encouraging whole foods will be helpful to reduce the sodium and ensure dietary consumption of minerals. So thinking back to that question I asked you at the beginning, how much of your grocery cart last week was processed foods versus whole foods? And how can that change? Can you reduce some of that? Maybe you'll try something new this week to encourage whole foods. Maybe it's not about the grocery cart, but maybe it's making more meals at home instead of eating them away. So thank you.
That's fantastic, Veronica.
Good.
Don't run away. Do you
Okay.
have any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Would you recommend bringing your vegetables home and chopping them up right away?
I definitely recommend.
I always thought the nutrients would be lost.
Yeah, so I do recommend that after you go grocery shopping, bring them home, wash them, chop them, because you eat them if they're already prepared. You're right, some of the nutrients can be lost if you cut them and wash them earlier, but so minimal, and a lot of the time they're lost anyways because we're not eating these foods, we're letting them go to waste anyways. So I would encourage you to try it and see if it helps to increase consumption. Yes.
What does DASH stand for?
What does DASH stand for? Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot to mention that. I'm sorry.
What good is Mrs. Dash?
What good is Mrs. Dash?
My mother-in-law uses it to, gosh, it's horrible stuff.
Yeah, so Mrs. Dash is a herb blend that you can get at the grocery store, different flavors, and it's a no salt added herb blend. So it's.
It feels like you've eaten soap salt because it stays in your mouth and all that stuff.
Yeah, so trying different herbs on your own, making your own herb sauces.
Try and say, please don't use it.
Yeah, so lots of different options out there. Yes.
What vitamin D?
What about vitamin D? Yeah, you're right. Vitamin D is probably one of the only supplements that we do recommend. It is in Canada's food guide right now that anyone over the age of 50 should be taking a vitamin D supplement, because where does our vitamin D come from? The sun, right? So we can't get it from dietary means, so we need to supplement with it. So thank you for bringing that up.
Is there an actual DASH diet?
Is there an actual DASH diet? Definitely. Lots of meal plans there. If you Google it, there's lots of different meal plans to give you some ideas. But remember, just basing your plate on lots of plant foods. So half your plate is vegetables, including a fruit at each meal, choosing a leaner protein, and a whole grain. That would be what a DASH dietary pattern looks like.
You just type in DASH diet?
Yeah, and there's lots of different DASH recipe books at the library too. The Toronto Public Library is great, so I would use that. No problem. Yes.
I've been told that when you cook vegetables, you should put some lemon juice on them to release vitamins and nutrients. Is there any validity to that?
So the question's about adding lemons or limes or acid to cooking vegetables to see if it will release vitamins. Not that I know of, but I can't say I've read anything to say either way. Do you have a question?
Yes, there's been some criticism of the nutritious value of wheat.
Of wheat?
And I was wondering, are oats considered one of the better grains to consume?
Yeah, is oats considered one of the better grains to consume? Definitely, I do recommend oats. Oats are a great source of fiber and a lot of those minerals. So if you like oats, I encourage it as a whole grain. And I think wheat or grains get a bad rap because a lot of the ones that we're eating are refined grains, right? So ones that don't have a lot of fiber, that are processed so that the minerals are they're not there. Lost, thank you.
Maybe
So,
one more.
yeah.
Last question.
Okay, last question.
Cheat and ask two at the same
Oh.
time. One would be a comment about psyllium husks, the use of that for fiber.
Sure.
And the second one I forgot.
Oh.
I win.
So the question's about
Because I knew Rob would be lined up for
the question's psyllium husks and can they be useful? And they can. They do provide a supplement of fiber, which is helpful for us. But I always recommend trying to get most of our minerals from whole food sources instead of isolated supplements. So if we can try to get most of our fiber from wheat, we'll also get all those other minerals that are attached to it. It's not a bad thing, but I always recommend whole foods first. I keep hitting this. Okay? Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.